Welcome to Independently Speaking, the podcast from the Independent Schools Association. ISA supports head teachers and staff across a wide variety of independent schools. Join us for a new episode as we explore the world of independent education, sharing insights from school leaders and discussing the challenges and opportunities shaping our sector. Here is your host, Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I am your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, the Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. Now, today we are continuing with our exploration of partnerships, and this time we are bringing this closer to home by discussing the importance of strong partnerships with parents in order to best support neurodiverse pupils in schools, why this genuine collaboration matters, and how schools and families can co-create inclusive learning environments. To do this today, we are joined by Catrina Lowri, who is a neurodivergent teacher bringing over 23 years of hands-on experience to the conversation. She's also an inclusion consultant and founder and director of Neuro Teachers, which provides practical, accessible strategies and training for schools and advocates for neuro-inclusive cultures. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today, Catrina.
Oh, thank you. Hello.
Can we start by giving our listeners a little bit about your journey, sort of what led you to found Neuro Teachers and how has your own neurodivergence shaped your work and worldview?
Okay, well, thank you for asking me that. I started Neuro Teachers back in 2020. My idea was to improve inclusion for neurodivergent people. And I had previously worked as a special needs coordinator and advisory teacher. And I had a part-time job, so I had the opportunity to try and do a bit of training. It became really popular. Of course, it's the beginning of 2020 and online training became rather popular around the beginning of 2020 for one reason or another. And it's my mission to try and show schools and nurseries and education establishments that inclusion benefits everyone. So if you have a neuro-inclusive environment with neuro-affirming practice, everyone's got a neurotype, and that will benefit the neurodivergent and the neurotypical children together.
And your experience of education as a neurodivergent teacher yourself, how did that develop for you? Was it a different experience, do you think, from the mainstream, or has it helped you develop your approach to supporting families and other children?
Yeah, certainly latterly. So when I first started my career, back when I was a student teacher, I was very open about the fact that at that point I only knew about the dyslexia. I have 5 neurodivergent conditions actually altogether. So I am dyslexic, bipolar, ADHD, auditory processing disorder, and dyspraxia. At the time, I only knew about the dyslexia, which was diagnosed when I was 9. When I was doing my PGCE, I was very open about the fact that I was dyslexic. I asked for reasonable adjustments at my interview. I was training to be a German teacher. We had to do a written task, and I'd applied for extra time for it. And I was very open about it. On my PGCE, we had very little training, if any, really, about special educational needs. I was asked to do a presentation about dyslexia. It was voluntary to turn up. So out of the 400 people who were on my PGCE course, only 35 people turned up. The lecturer at that time used to have slides, like plastic slides that you used to put on an OHP. The lecturer lost them. So I had to do the entire thing off the top of my head with no notes whatsoever. But it was really like the people who were in the room really enjoyed it. And then at the end of it, this chap who was a bit older than me, who was doing a PGC, came up to me and he said, the thing is, Catrina, if you're middle class like you, it's dyslexia. But if you're working class like me, you're just a bit thick and rubbish at reading. And so from that onwards, I just thought, oh, this is not good, me being open about this. So I just hid it. So for the next 17 years of my career, I completely hid the fact that I was neurodivergent in any way. As time went on, I got diagnosed with bipolar, and I started to have a suspicion about the other needs that I had. And I just hid it to the point where I just couldn't anymore. And then I had what I can only describe really as neurodivergent burnout. From that point onwards, it meant I couldn't hide the fact I was neurodivergent anymore. So I just sort of leaned into it really. And it was very interesting because I was working in inclusion. There were some colleagues who were phenomenal about supporting me. I absolutely cannot thank them enough. And then there were others who really surprised me and let's just say weren't as receptive to the idea of having a neurodivergent colleague as I might have expected.
And do you feel that was because they had their own biases towards what that meant and what that might mean to them as colleagues?
I think it was a little bit like, well, there was one who said that I had been pretending to be something I wasn't, which is true because I've been masking. So that was fair cop. But there were others who I think they thought that I was going to be leaning on them more, even though I'd been doing the job for like 5 years. Well, in that particular job, I've been there for 4 years previously. I think there was some who thought I was going to lean on them a lot more as a result of it, which was interesting. And there was some who just didn't like, they just didn't connect with me anymore. And I don't know whether that was embarrassment or what, but there were others who were absolutely phenomenal and amazing and really, really supportive.
And quite often it's a lack of understanding, isn't it? And a lack of real knowledge of what, what the needs might actually be and where consideration needs to be taken.
I was quite taken aback, really, because like I said, I was working specifically in inclusion. You know, I've worked in inclusion for the last sort of 12 years of my career. And so it's a bit surprising. But, you know, I think the kids that I worked with really appreciated it. And also, you know, I have kind of made it the basis of my entire career now. So certainly leaned in a fair bit, Helen.
Yeah, absolutely, Catrina, you definitely have, and very well indeed. And you talk a lot about working collaboratively with parents or carers. And why is this so essential for neurodiverse pupils to really thrive at school?
Well, it's where expertise meets. So the parents and carers are the expert in the child, and the schools and the teachers, the special needs coordinators or additional need coordinators, we call them in Wales, they are the expert in how to provide the education and make the reasonable adjustments. So it makes perfect sense that you should centre this around the child and work together as a team. And I've seen some amazing examples of co-production. One really brilliant one last week, in fact, where when parents and schools work together with the child at the heart of it, it can be brilliant.
And you're right, that sort of it is a partnership, isn't it, amongst all of the people involved, very much supporting the child. So how can schools overcome some of the common barriers that get in the way of that partnership?
Okay, I think number one, everyone always talks about communication. I think the main thing with communication is to have as many different channels open as you can without allowing the teachers to feel bombarded. So if you have a variety of different ways in which you can get the information across to teachers, like maybe you have a day a week where, you know, you can speak to them personally, you have a phone calling time, you have some kind of messaging service. You can do that through things like Class Dojo. Other brands are available. So that you can have Zooms, you can have in person, you have options to do it, you can do it in writing, etc. Then you've got lots of options available. I don't want to give teachers too many channels to have to monitor, but if you maybe ask parents at the beginning of the year which is their preferred method, then you only need to monitor those channels for those parents, I think is good. And then I think also it's to remember that neurodivergent conditions tend to be genetic, like they are 95% heritable. So it might be that the parents could also be neurodivergent themselves and may have sensory communication, social communication, executive function differences themselves. They may also not have had a particularly positive experience of school themselves, so could be bringing their own school-based trauma even with them, or their own prejudices against what a school is like, even if your school is very radically different to their own. So there maybe needs to be some bridges being formed about showing the school, the parents, that you are a trusted individual. They chose you for their child, so they must trust you to an extent.
Yeah, and that would allow you to really engage meaningfully with the parents, wouldn't it? Rather than just doing those sort of reports and termly meetings that are sometimes the case.
Exactly, because the thing is, to be honest, like a written report is only as good as the person writing it, like there's some which can be really quite factual and there's others which really capture the child. Some people might prefer a conversation, some people might prefer a Zoom, some people might prefer a voice note. But I think it's having options available to you so that you know which lines of communication work best for that family.
And that kind of gives that communication link, doesn't it? So you can actually report to them and get feedback from them. But how can schools really delve deeper with parents in co-production so that they are supporting the support plans or the environmental adaptations or even the overall school culture? How can they do that with the parents?
I think the main thing is to make sure that the child is at the center of everything that you do. So it has to be a conversation. How can we work together to support your child? Then, like whenever I deliver training, I always ask people to have a child in mind, and I always ask them to consider the answer to 2 questions. So the first one is, what are your hopes and aspirations for this child? And the second is, how are you going to use this information to help them reach those aspirations? So it's a similar sort of thing. Ultimately, it's about asking families what the ultimate next goal is for the child, and then working with them to backwards chain it to put the steps in place that would help the child to reach that goal. And I mean, I'm talking about one big goal rather than lots of little tiny, because the steps in between would be the kind of like assess, plan, do, review that you would do. I mean, the ultimate goal is really, what are they going to be like as a 25-year-old with a job, for example?
Yeah, and having that future insight is really important. And it isn't, even though the here and now is vital and important, it's having that thought of what's going to happen next is a vital part of that co-production, isn't it, with the parents? And you've mentioned a bit about having insight into parents' own lived experiences. So if a child hasn't had a formal diagnosis, how can schools best communicate and work with the parents who maybe see a diagnosis as a negative?
Yeah, it's interesting because it very much depends on the diagnosis. Like, okay, there'll be, right. So there are going to be cultural differences from family to family. I mean cultural differences from family to family, and not cultural differences between religion or an ethnicity, etc. So there'll be some families who are very, very open about it. Maybe both parents are diagnosed and they have a neurodivergent family, and they're really surprised if they didn't have a neurodivergent child, in which case that's quite easy to deal with. If you believe, however, that parents are reluctant or resistant to the idea of using such words, then there are various ways I feel that you can approach it. So the first is by saying something like, what have you heard about dyslexia? What have you heard about autism? What have you heard about ADHD? And then gauging it, right? Now, in my experience, and I'm using broad brushstrokes here, in my experience, parents don't seem to mind quite so much if a child might be dyslexic because they can just use a laptop, right? Because we all do that anyway, don't we? Accessibility tools are something everybody uses, so that's fine. And also they might be Richard Branson, so that's also good, really. There's lots of famous people who are dyslexic, so that's fine. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to be, I'm not being glib about it. It's just that is, generally speaking, people don't mind that so much. Autism or ADHD feel like big labels, and parents are often concerned that children who end up with one of those diagnostic labels may not have academic or career success later. And it's true that there is underemployment in those areas, but there are also hugely successful people who have those conditions. I mean, I'm ADHD, I run a business, So it is a case of, we are not in the business of diagnosing a child. If you wanted to do that, you would have become a doctor, and you're intelligent enough and you're well educated enough to have been able to have done that. You just didn't want to be a doctor. You wanted to be a teacher. So, you can ask if they have heard of something and what they think about it.
Yeah.
You can talk about something like working memory or social communication or an aspect of those things, but we can't safely say that somebody definitely has a diagnosis. We just have to support the child that's in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads a bit into neuro-inclusive school cultures, doesn't it? Which is something which you have also spoken about. So what does it look like to you, and how can parent-school partnerships contribute to embedding that culture long term?
Yeah, I mean, it is in every part of aspects of the school. The first thing is the school environment. So having a sort of lower arousal environment where sensory needs are taken into consideration, things that will minimize the amount of noise, such as using natural materials. A lot of schools are using like Hessian backing or corkboard backing for their display boards. They're using lots of soft materials. These days, when I go into a reception or a preschool, they'll often have a lot of natural materials for the toys, which obviously brings the noise level down. That obviously keeps the children much more in that sort of calm, alert space. They're very busy, but they're more likely to be able to regulate. And because we were born into a natural world, lots of outdoor activities, etc. So I'm thinking about noisy areas like canteens, school corridors, etc. What can you do to minimize the noise while allowing the natural flow of activity to go through the place? The next thing I think is as well, considering the teacher's sensory needs. There's a 20% chance that the teachers who you work with are neurodivergent, and allowing teachers some autonomy about how they lay out their classroom, or possibly even which classroom they have, because some people might need one that's downstairs and backs onto an outdoor space so they can go out and have a breather between lessons. Some teachers may need to be next door to somebody who they can go and completely info dump to because they've had a really busy lesson and they need to get it out of their system. Thinking about things like that in terms of the environment. And then also it's about having your communication aids in every classroom. So it's best practice to have visuals, to make spaces very clear about what the purpose is of them so that everybody knows. It's best practice to have a visual timetable, even in secondary, and yes, even in post-16. We all like visuals. That's why we have apps on our phones. And I think when it comes to the parents as well, it's communicating to them that we are having that lower arousal approach. So, if it's primary school and you have a toy day at the end of term, which some still do, have a toy day at the end of term, nothing loud and beepy. It's going to be too excitable, right? It's just having that that philosophy. We want to be a calm, alert environment with good communication.
And that leads a little bit, doesn't it, into some of these experience days that schools do. Is there a way that, because obviously there's something we want all the children to enjoy and experience and not find stressful or something that they can't cope with. Is there strategies that you're aware of that can help introduce those better for those children who are neurodiverse?
Absolutely. I mean, if you've got a dressing up day, so World Book Day is one of the ones that a lot of people do dressing up as, is making sure that you prepare children in advance for the fact that people won't be wearing their own clothes and there'll be different activities. So that would be a series of social stories about it, making it very clear that it's children's choice, because some children might want to still come in their uniform, in which case they come as a schoolboy or schoolgirl.
Yeah.
That's fine. There are many books with people who go to school in them. They can be one of those characters. And so it's thinking about making sure that you prepare children way in advance for what's going to happen. So it's not that neurodivergent people can't cope with change. It just needs to be predictable change. You can teach change. That's fine. It's just that, to be honest, no humans like change, do they? So preparing for that. If you're going on a school trip, again, you can do things like you can visit it using Google Earth. We have lots of technology available to us these days. You can look at maps online. You can choose a place that you're going to meet to, you know, every hour or something, or choose the groupings that you're going to go in advance, and in who's going to be your safe adult and where will they be sitting, etc. So if you're going to a zoo or something. So yeah, there's lots of things that you can do. It's all really around social communication and using the technology available to you to prepare.
And there's a lot of initiatives now, like Partnerships for Inclusion of Neurodiversity in Schools, PINS,
Yes.
gaining traction. How can schools, health services, and parent care and forums really collaborate effectively?
PINS is a project that I've been quite involved in. It's only for primary schools, and they're targeted primary schools, which are within a local authority. It is a relatively small pot of money, but it has been quite successful. So schools get given a pot of money to do some training around neurodivergence. They will have selected the topics that they want to do. So for example, they might have selected emotionally based school avoidance, or masking, or ADHD in girls, or improving adaptive teaching, for example. And then they get matched with a provider who then does some training for them. It has been pretty successful considering that it was the first year last year. There's been a lot of work. It's generally run in close conjunction with, or possibly even managed by, the local parent carer forum. So the schools have been encouraged to have coffee mornings and information days with the local parent carer forum, so that they can get to know, so that the SEN parents, or I should also say this is only in England, by the way, so the SEN parents can then also have an idea about what's going on and how they can help with that. And there also have been some training programs, for example, that I've put on, where parents and governors and other interested parties from the local community, such as people in the PTFA, have also been involved in that. So yeah, it's been a really good way to kind of bridge the gap between schools, their training, and the community around them.
And we've been talking a lot, haven't we, today, about sort of partnerships with parents and how vital they are. So if a parent is sort of coming towards a school, maybe it might be one they've been established in a while, which is changing its strategies, or a new school, what can they expect to ask for or offer themselves when entering into that partnership?
Okay, well, the first thing is that there's no need for a diagnosis for a child to get support. All children should be able to access universal provision. Now, the name of this changes pretty much on a weekly basis. No, not quite as often as that, but every couple of years. So it was originally called differentiation. And in the teaching standards for English, all teachers have a responsibility to adapt the teaching and learning to what the child requires. It's also in the SEN Code of Practice 2015. I know that's being updated. And it's also in the Equalities Act. So parents can expect universal provision. Now, what that actually means is that the teacher has to adapt within the realms of what is possible within their classroom to each of the individuals. That is simple, but not necessarily easy. If you would like an easily accessible list, I can provide people with a link where, if I've got a list of 9 adaptive teaching tips, which parents can then use, and that's something that they can use as a basis for a conversation with teachers. Teachers are incredibly skilled at doing this. Sometimes, however, they may miss a useful piece of information that you didn't really even think to mention. Like, say, for example, if your child was a bit late speaking and they didn't speak in full sentences until they were 3 or 4, even a teacher of them at 16 might actually find that quite useful to know. So those kinds of pieces of information about development can affect learning in more of a profound way, even if the child has caught up really well.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're happy to, we can put a link for that list for our listeners when we below the episode. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. If you were going to send out messages to educators who may be new to neurodiversity or feel under-resourced, what would those messages be?
I think the first one is always try and be curious. And the second one is, I know it's difficult to be curious when you're stressed. So if you're having a child who's giving you head scratchy moments or confusion, or possibly even keeping you awake at night, there is a chance that you might have missed something. And that's not your fault, because like I said, when you're stressed, you can get way too close to a problem. It can be quite difficult. Remember that you have an amazing resource that's available to you. It's called the family of the child, right? Sometimes something that might be seem completely insignificant to you has changed for the child. I'll give you, for instance, a child who I had been working with who had difficulty with attendance. Her father had been made redundant from his job, but it was okay because he got a good payout and he got another job immediately. So it hadn't made any difference to the economic situation of the family. And the father hadn't even thought that it was worth mentioning. But what happened was it changed the routine for his daughter, who was autistic, because it meant that he couldn't drive her to school anymore. And she had to get the bus. And though she was perfectly capable of getting the bus, she got the bus to town with her friends at the weekend. It was a disruption that was quite significant to her. Now, had we not had that conversation and I said, what's been going on recently? And it hadn't, it was almost an off the cuff comment that made me realize that actually perhaps that bus trouble was a problem for her. Not because she couldn't do it, but because it was different.
Yeah.
So you've got this amazing resource that's available. So try and step back from it and be curious. If you're extremely stressed, then you do need possibly help from colleagues to find some support for yourself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. Look after your own well-being first. Curious.
That's really good advice. And are there any, there probably aren't simple, I'm probably simplifying it by saying simple first steps, they're probably not simple, that both the school and the home can make, that would make a significant difference straight away?
I think the number one thing is sending the message to all children that they will be given unconditional positive regard for being their authentic self. So if we allow our children to have a sense of belonging so they can be truly authentic, and no matter how they show up, this is their school. They belong at this school. This is their teacher. This is their TA. This is their class. This is their community. They belong here. If they know that no matter how they show up, they are going to be accepted and cared for, then you can achieve amazing things.
That's quite a powerful word, isn't it? Belonging. It's a very powerful thing, and means a great deal to children and adults in whole school communities. I think that's a really good, significant first step. Thank you. This has been a really in-depth and informative discussion. Thank you, Catrina, for sharing so much with us today.
Thank you. It's been delightful to be here.
This has been a really in-depth and informative discussion. Thank you, Catrina, for sharing so much with us today. To our listeners, if today's discussion has been of interest to you, then do subscribe, listen to past episodes, and tune in again for future conversations on this and other relevant topics for education. Until then, stay curious and stay connected.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.